The upset-minded Purdue spoiler makers now have to travel to the 4th-ranked Ohio State Buckeyes, who have the number 1 offense in the country. This is going to be an interesting matchup. I am certainly excited to watch it, for sure. On the way back from the Penn State game, which I will be attending in person, Penn State versus Michigan, you can check out that video. It's the most recent one besides this. And if you're new to this channel, make sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Today we are going to break down this matchup, preview each team position by position, and compare. And then at the end, I'm going to give my prediction. Ohio State is given a 91% chance to win. I mean, you look at ESPN's FPI, Michigan's at 5th, Ohio State's at 3rd. There's a massive gap between those two teams. Like, the top 3 of the FPI, there's a cliff from them down, honestly. And what's scary about that is I don't think there's as big of a gap this year between the top 3 teams as there have been in the past. So that's interesting. Purdue's only given a 9% chance to win this game despite their amazing performance against Michigan State this past weekend. Ohio State's also favored by 21 points. Only beat Nebraska by 9 on the road. Purdue has, I think, their largest margin of defeat was 14 early in the year to Notre Dame, and that was before Aidan O'Connell could really get in his rhythm. And what's interesting about the spread, too, Ohio State's 4-1 against the spread, despite having an 8-1 record. They have not necessarily been impressing anyone, at least against teams who have a pulse. I'm not going to count Indiana or Rutgers or even Maryland. I'm just not going to. I don't for any team, whether it's Michigan, who's my own team, or any other team. Ohio State is yet to prove that they can blow out competent teams, to be honest with you. Nebraska, Penn State, Oregon, Minnesota's probably the closest to a blowout of a competent team. But let's get into it. So first of all, you have the QB position, the position that's going to be the most interesting here. Both QBs have passed for over 2,000 yards. One, being Aidan O'Connell, was the backup to start the year. And one has the number 1 QB rating in the country. His name is CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud has passed for 2,675 yards, completes 67% of his passes, averages 9.8 yards per pass, 25 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. He's been only sacked 7 times. Has a 175.9 passer rating. Aidan O'Connell has passed for 2,087 yards, completes 71.6% of his passes. That's pretty good. Averages 7.7 yards per pass, 12 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. He's been sacked 14 times, and he has a 145 exact QB rating. Neither O'Connell or Stroud run much, though Stroud is more mobile, and I would say, to be honest with you, that O'Connell, despite the smaller supporting cast, can have even better spurts of explosiveness. But Stroud is more consistent. Stroud doesn't have 8 turnovers, and he has 25 passing touchdowns. Granted, he has the far superior supporting cast, but I'd say at QB, I would say here that Ohio State has a slight edge, though it's probably not as big of an edge as many would like to think. O'Connell, when he doesn't turn the ball over, he's prolific in the passing game. Ohio State takes it at QB. At O-line, this should not even be a story or debate. Purdue's QBs have suffered 25 sacks. Ohio State's only 11. Ohio State also has a run game. Purdue does not have as good of a run game. They only average 2.4 yards per rush. Ohio State takes the cake at O-line. Their O-line gets bigger every time they play. They did struggle against Nebraska, though. That's the interesting thing for me. They showed struggles, particularly in the run game against the Cornhuskers. Now for running backs, this is not going to be pretty close either. King Doerre is their main running back. He has 395 rushing yards, averages 3.9 yards per carry, has 2 touchdowns. Dylan Downing and Xander Horvath each have 137 yards, and Horvath has 2 touchdowns. Downing has none. They average just over 3 yards per carry. The whole team for Purdue averages 2.4 yards per carry when rushing. Ohio State is a different story. You have Trevion Henderson with 937 rushing yards, 7.3 yards per carry, and 12 rushing touchdowns. Mayan Williams has just over 300 rushing yards, averages 7.2 yards per carry, and has 2 rushing touchdowns. Master Teague has 253 rushing yards, 5.6 yards per carry, and 3 rushing touchdowns. So that right there, I think that just proves Ohio State does have the far better running back room. So far, the position that has been the closest for these teams to compare is the quarterback position. And if not for O'Connell, having games where he's a turnover machine, I might actually give the QB position to Purdue. Because with Stroud, the interesting thing with Stroud is I don't even know how close he is to being elite, because when you have as good of a supporting cast as he does, it's kind of hard to evaluate, especially when one game he looks like a Heisman winner, and then against Nebraska, he looks like he doesn't know how to make it the best decision against Nebraska when faced with adversity like pressure, which because of the great O-line, he obviously is not used to. Now we go to the receiving end. The receiving end is going to be another close comparison, at least for the team's respective wide receiver number 1. Because here's the thing. David Bell already has 1,000 receiving yards. He has 1,003 receiving yards, averages 15.7 yards per reception. He has 5 receiving touchdowns. Ohio State's leader is now Jaxon Smith-Njigba, who wasn't even talked about much in the preseason. He now has 888 receiving yards, averages 7.8 yards per reception, and has 4 receiving touchdowns. He's followed up in yards by Garrett Wilson with 687, Chris Olave with 623, and Ruckert, the tight end, with 256. Wilson has 6 receiving touchdowns, Olave with 10, Ruckert with 3, and Smith-Njigba again with 4. So Ohio State overall, loaded beyond loaded wide receivers and tight ends just everywhere. I mean, you throw the ball up, as long as it's not very off, there's a good chance that your wide receiver or tight end will make a move and get it. You can't exactly say the same thing about Purdue, but I would say Purdue's wide receivers and tight ends, I'd say all of them are pretty good compared to some of the schools that they face. And David Bell is amazing talent, especially for Purdue. Again, 1,003 receiving yards, 5 touchdowns. Milton Wright follows him up next with 368 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. Payne Durham, the tight end, 356 receiving yards, 4 receiving touchdowns. And then you got Jackson Anthrop with 316 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. I would give Ohio State, again, wide receiver and tight ends here, but if you're to compare the wide receiver number 1s, I'd put that. I couldn't compare, David Bell to Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, or Jaxon Smith-Njigba. I'd almost be tempted to say he's better, because David Bell is it's him. He's kind of, if you look at the stats, he looks like a one-man army for Purdue. It's the same thing. It's the same thing with Rondale Moore. It's the system that Jeff Brom has. He seems to, get these NFL wide receivers, at least like one of them, and then this other supporting cast surrounding them. David Bell is amazing. It's going to be interesting watching him play along with Olave, Wilson, and Njigba on the same field. I'm very excited to see that. It's going to be like 4 elite wide receivers. It's crazy. Now moving on to the defense. Now here's the thing too with Purdue's defense. Purdue's defense is sneakily good. Sneakily good. You can make the argument the reason they upset Michigan State is because their defense stepped up when they needed to. Their defense did to Michigan State what Michigan State's defense is all about. They bent. They didn't break, though. Allowed Walker to run pretty well. They got him for a fumble and stopped him short when they needed to. They picked off Thorne on a critical 4th and 4. That's bend but not break type stuff, especially with Michigan State. It's not like they shut down Michigan State's offense completely. They allowed 29 points. But Purdue, I mean, you do have an NFL defensive end in George Karlaftis, who only has 2.5 sacks, 2 passes defended, but he also has 2 forced fumbles, 2 fumble recoveries, and a fumble for a touchdown, a scoop and score, and 25 total tackles. And his presence is certainly felt from opposing offensive lines. Kydron Jenkins has 3 sacks, leads the team in sacks, 1 pass defended, 24 total tackles. It seems to me that, there are some teams where the linebackers are mainly about sacks. Michigan could be an example with David Ojabo. Purdue, from what I saw in the Michigan State game and here, their D-line is very solid. Your leader in interceptions is Cam Allen, the safety, with 4. He also has a fumble recovery and 2 passes defended. Dedrick Mackey has 2 picks, 1 forced fumble and 2 passes defended. And Jalen Graham, the linebacker, 2 picks, 6 passes defended. One of those picks was a pick 6 and a forced fumble. Purdue here, they have just this sneaky good defense. They only allow 18.4 points per game. Again, this is them facing Wisconsin, whose offense has looked a lot better since they've restricted Graham Mertz. They faced Notre Dame. They held Minnesota to 20 points, which is not the most impressive, but their defense has kept them in games when their offense just continues to turn over the football. That's what Purdue does. And Purdue, they still struggle scoring points per game. They only score 24.8 points per game, but they're an improving football team. I still don't believe they lost to Notre Dame by 14 and even lost to Minnesota the way they just beat Michigan State. But this is kind of how Jeff Brom rolls. Look back at 2018. All you Buckeye fans will know that game very well. Purdue went to finish 6-7 that year and got destroyed by Auburn in the bowl. Purdue is just this sentient team that people overlook because they're not flashy. That's what I think Purdue is, and I think that reflects good coaching. It absolutely reflects good coaching. Now on to Ohio State's defense, and then on to my prediction. Ronnie Hickman. I saw a post on Instagram where a Buckeye fan account said Ronnie Hickman might, solidify himself as the best player on that defense because he is everywhere and tries to make every tackle. He has 73 total tackles, 1 sack, 2 interceptions, one of which was a pick 6. He leads in total tackles by 73, and in second place, Cody Simon, the linebacker, only has 44. He also has 1 sack, 1 pick, and a pass defended. Your leader in sacks is Haskell Garrett, the defensive tackle, who I mentioned in the preseason as someone who will be an important piece to this D-line, who returned a good amount of people, but also had some, new starters. And it's good that you had him return because now you have guys like Jack Sawyer and even JT Tuimoloau, who, while they may be more edge rushers, it's good to have someone with experience and with talent to kind of raise up those younger guys. So Garrett with 4.5 sacks, a pass defended, 2 fumble recoveries. He also had that fumble recovery for a touchdown against Minnesota. Tyleik Williams has 4 sacks. Jack Sawyer, Tyreek Smith, Zach Harrison all have 3. JT Tuimoloau and Antoine Jackson have 2.5. Also, Jack Sawyer, Tyreek Smith, Harrison, all the guys with 3 sacks have at least 1 forced fumble. This D-line, they may not have the best D tackles in the nation. They may not have the best edge rushers in the nation. But just because you aren't number 1 at individual positions doesn't mean a larger group can't be, because they are this D-line, they can shut down the run when they need to. They get to the quarterback when they need to. They have 33 total sacks. They also have 9 forced fumbles, granted only 4 fumble recoveries, and the defense is 11 picks. But you can see where I'm going. The stats tell you that the D-line is the best part of this defense. And if you watch the games, if Ohio State can't get pressure or they don't get to the quarterback in time in one moment, look at Adrian Martinez. You prevent the D-line from getting to you, and you face Ohio State's secondary, there's a lot of room to march down the field. And with that being said, Denzel Burke, one of the most lockdown corners in the country, along with Ronnie Hickman in that secondary, it is interesting to me that despite those 2 good players, among others as well, Cameron Brown and Cameron Martinez, both defensive backs, it is interesting. Very interesting to me. And I understand that, it was the case last year, a lot of it because Shaun Wade converted to a different position. But this secondary is a weakness of this Ohio State team, and we can't forget that, especially when Purdue just tore up a team with a weak secondary, a bite obviously much weaker than Ohio State's. So that's the preview, position by position. I think that Ohio State, mostly by talent alone, is above and beyond Purdue in most aspects outside of QB and wide receiver. I'd say their offenses are closer than their defenses. And it's, again, because of talent. Ohio State has a bunch of 5 stars. Purdue has really 3 stars, maybe a 4-star scattered here and there. But talent makes such a big, big difference. But nonetheless, my prediction is interesting because despite Ohio State, being better at every position, in my opinion, whether it's by a big margin or by a hair off of my head, I don't think Ohio State covers the spread. I'm thinking about it, and I'm thinking maybe Purdue's kind of in for a loss here, is what I'm thinking. But I don't believe that Ohio State, Purdue is that sneaky good defense. Purdue is explosive against bad secondaries. As long as Purdue doesn't turn the ball over, as long as they're not a turnover machine, this could turn into a shootout, an absolute shootout. Because the difference between Purdue and, let's say, a Michigan State is Michigan State, when you have a running back who's your best player, you got to face Ohio State's D-line. As long as Purdue can protect O'Connell long enough, he can do some real damage. Think back to that Penn State game, who is also, keep in mind, a 6-3 football team, just like Purdue. So my prediction here, just to go back over it, Ohio State wins. They definitely win by double digits. I think the 21 points, especially the spread keeps going in Ohio State's favor. I think it opened up around 19. I wouldn't say that Ohio State's going to win by 3 or 4 touchdowns here. I've said that enough times. It wasn't the case against Penn State. I even had Ohio State laying too much points on Nebraska. I said 10 to 14 points. It's not the case. Ohio State, against decent defenses, has red zone issues, and their play calling needs to be slightly more adaptive. That's all I have to say. I think Ohio State wins. Thank you all for watching. If you like this video, remember to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and comment your thoughts on this game down below. Who do you think wins? Do you think Purdue has a chance of upsetting Ohio State on their own home field? Do you think even that Ohio State, manages to cover that spread and just blows the doors off Purdue? Tell me what you think in the comments below. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you around.